That latest Critical Role episode, huh? If you guys are unaware, Matt Mercer just had one of the most traumatic, I don't have another word for it, episodes of Critical Role in the show's entire history. And I think that there's a lot of lessons we can learn from it. So, first and foremost, spoilers, not just for Critical Role Campaign 3, but all of Critical Role. I'm going to be talking about the entire show in general, so, spoilers, beware, beware. But if you don't care for spoilers, proceed on, my friends, because we are going to be talking about the darkest hour, which is very appropriate for this episode, because, yeah, two-player characters have just bitten the dust. Fern and Ourro, Liam O'Brien and Ashley Johnson's characters, they are dead. Not rolling death saving throws. They are dead. Super dead. And this is one of the most tragic things that's ever happened on Critical Role. Critical Role's cast took on a boss that they thought they could fight, but they were scattered, they were disorganized, and the boss punished them for it by killing two player characters. A bunch of other player characters are down. This is dire straits. This is a really tragic moment in the campaign. And this, I think, is something that we can learn from. Tragedy, sadness, dire straits, these sort of things, they are something that a lot of DMs desire in D&D and writers desire in their storytelling. There's a few reasons for that, but it can be really hard to pull off. But Matt Mercer managed to pull it off pretty decently here. He created a really good darkest hour moment, and I think that there are a few things we can learn from it. It's a tight rope to walk, but I think we can learn. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so what the hell am I talking about? What is the darkest hour? Why is this important? Well, the darkest hour is a writing trope where essentially the bad guys close in on the heroes. This happens in tons of stories. Like Lord of the Rings, for example, one of the darkest hours would be when Gandalf falls against the Balrog. In Two Towers, it's when the defenders of Helm's Deep need to retreat into the keep. In Return of the King, it's when Frodo gives into the ring's power. There are tons of darkest hour moments in tons of different stories. And this is important for a reason. A lot of the time it happens as we're going into the final act of the story, when we're going into the end, reminding the audience that there's risk here, people can die, bad things can happen, right before the ending of the story. That's good. It builds up the tension in the audience and builds up the tension in your player characters if you're doing a D&D game. I would say this is especially important in D&D because D&D campaigns can be really, really long. And especially in Dungeons & Dragons, we're doing a lot of different combats, and in most D&D campaigns, those combats are something that players generally are going to take victory in. And if your players have a streak of 50 sessions where they've never lost, they can get a little bit cocky. And that is a problem. The cockiness is bad because there needs to be some sort of risk in the combat in order for the players to buy into it. Players are just not going to be as enthusiastic about combats where they don't feel any sense of danger, any sense of risk. When there's no risk, there's no thrill. And when there's no thrill, the game becomes a lot less fun. Now, of course, I don't want to stress my players out or traumatize them, but a little bit of healthy pressure can really help to make combat that much more visceral. That's why the darkest hour can be really helpful in a D&D game. A moment where the players realize, oh my god, this is bad. We are losing a player character death, an NPC death, a moment where the players need to run away from the BBEG. Those are the kind of moments I'm thinking about here. However, I know a lot of you are already thinking in your heads what the problem here can be. You do not want to railroad your players into this moment. One of our number one things as Dungeon Masters is never take away player agency. A big part of this game is choice, and forcing players into failure can be really, really bad. It doesn't matter if you're forcing players into failure conscientiously, if you know you're doing it. It matters if your players feel like they're being forced into failure. Matt Colville did a great video about this called Catastrophic Failure, where players were essentially being framed for some kind of murder they didn't commit, and their options were slowly closing in until one of the player characters, the wizard, died. And it was a really, really sad moment. And it sucked because the players didn't feel like they earned that. The players felt like they were forced into that moment, and some of the players were actually kind of mad at Matt Colville, and he made a whole video about it. Of course, it all worked out because he's Matt Colville, and he's amazing. But that entire video showcases how this can go wrong, how players can feel like their agency is getting taken away, and how that can result in some bad blood being brewed at the table. Alright, so with all that being said, I hope now you understand what the darkest hour is, why a lot of DMs desire it, and why a lot of the time it doesn't work in D&D, or at least a lot of the time players don't buy into it because of lack of agency, because of railroading, that sort of thing. You don't want that to happen. So how does Matt Mercer handle this moment? Well, he's done it a few times, and each time I think a little bit differently, and I think it works each time as well. The first time I can remember is Chroma Conclave. If you guys recall, all the way back in Critical Role Campaign 1, 4 giant dragons, it was actually worse than I remembered, 4 giant dragons fell onto the city of Iman, where the party were hanging out, and these were all ancient dragons, and the party obviously couldn't fight this. They had to run. This was plain and obvious. Immediately, they tried to attack it, they realized that it was futile, and they ran away from these 4 giant dragons, tearing apart the city. That is a Darkest Hour moment that showcases one method of doing this. You place a scenario in front of the players that is plain as day that they cannot fight. They cannot win this. They need to run. A lot of DMs do this, and I think it works out. It transforms the goal of the combat, or the goal of the situation. Instead of the goal being kill bad guy, the goal is now run away because we're going to die. That is great. It's an eye-opener to players that they can't win every single combat. In an unaired episode of Shadow over Kaer Konos, I did this, and by unaired, it hasn't come out yet. I record these in advance. But anyway, look, point is, in an unaired episode of my actual play D&D podcast, the party went up against a creature that they could not fight. And one of the players, Jacob from Crow's Perch, immediately called us out and said, we need to go, let's run. And the goal became to run away from this creature. And it was a great moment. Curse of Strahd does this a lot as well, where Strahd appears before the player characters. Obviously, the players can't beat Strahd at level 3, and he's probably going to kick their butts. This is a great Darkest Hour moment where Strahd appears before the party after they claim the Sun Sword, or after they talk to the Vistani, stuff like that, where the party realizes, oh my god, the bad guy, even though we've had some success, the bad guy is still super, super powerful. These moments work. I think they're good. However, the situation with Odahan in Campaign 3, the situation where 2 player characters died, that situation is a little bit different. Matt put the players in front of a situation that they actually thought they could take some level of victory in. And they couldn't. So, what does this mean? Why is this different from the Chroma Conclave? Because this moment was largely unexpected by both the party and, obviously I can't read Matt Mercer's mind, but maybe even the Dungeon Master himself. I have done this as well. I put my players into a situation in my own home game where I thought that they might be able to take victory. It would be a typical combat, players would probably be downed, but I didn't think anyone would die. But a nat 20 roll on my part resulted in a player character death, and it was completely unexpected. Now, I actually planned for that to be a Darkest Hour moment, but not because the players would die. I thought that an NPC would die, and that would be sad, and we would move on. But no, I was completely caught off guard by a player character death, and this shows the other way you can do this. Take advantage of the fact that D&D can be unexpected. As a dungeon master, you don't always have control over everything, and sometimes that is good. Sometimes the dice are going to tell a story that you didn't see coming and that you can take advantage of. I don't think Odahan was a threat that Bell's Hells could take on. Maybe they could have run away, but Matt Mercer didn't hold back punches. Matt Mercer let this bad guy go all out on the party. She realized they were scattered, and she fought. She didn't show any mercy. And I think that that is actually kind of a good thing. Now, of course, it depends on the campaign. It depends on the campaign you're running. This isn't going to fit every single D&D game without fail. That's where the problem talking about D&D. Everyone plays this game differently. But if you're playing a game where there is risk, where there is intense combats, having a BBEG take advantage of the party's disorganization, that's part of the game. The party in this moment, Bell's Hells, they weren't playing very well from a gameplay standpoint, and the bad guy took advantage of that. Matt Mercer lets this become the Darkest Hour. Even if he didn't plan it, he let this become a dire moment that a lot of people are going to remember, and I think it really, really worked here. I think as Dungeon Masters, sometimes we can feel the need to pull back, to take it easy on the players. And while that does have its place, I do think that there's nothing wrong with, holding your punches back every now and then. I do think there are also times where you need to let the consequences of player actions result in bad things happening. You need to let the blade go in, so to speak, and that's exactly what Matt did here. He let the bad guy be bad, and 2 player characters lost their lives because of it. When we as Dungeon Masters think of these dire, dark hour moments, we often think of the Chroma Conclave, where we put a situation in front of the players and the goal becomes to run. The player characters get away to fight another day. we often don't think about the unexpected darkest hour moments where we think maybe the player characters can take this threat on. It's going to be tough, it's going to be a rough battle, but we don't think of the moments where, what if they lose? What if the dice aren't in their favor? What if the players don't have a good plan in place? Sometimes we as Dungeon Masters will put that fight in front of the party, that tough fight that we know is going to down some player characters, but at the end of the day, it's going to be one of those risky combats they're going to remember. And the party, you realize midway through, they're losing. Sometimes you have to let that blade sink in every now and then. Sometimes you need to let the consequences of their actions play out. The unexpected darkest hour moments are going to be the ones that we're going to talk about for a long time. This Critical Role episode has been trending for a long time on social media for a reason. The audience is engaged. People feel the tension here, and you can see the looks of the players, Laura Bailey, Liam O'Brien, all the players at the table. You can see the looks on their faces as this all is coming down. You can see that they are invested. There's emotion there, and that's a big reason why D&D works as a game. Those moments that you're going to remember forever, you're going to remember them because of the emotions associated. And sometimes those emotions are going to be sad. And that is going to be the end of this episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. Obviously, this darkest hour moment is not over. We cut it off midway through. The episode ended. So we have no idea how this whole thing is going to play out. For all I know, the 2 player characters that died are going to come back to life. I have no idea. But right now, as it stands, I think this is a great lesson that Dungeon Masters can learn if you want to run a game with that emotion, with that risk, with that tension to combat. If that's the kind of game you want to run, then there's a lot of lessons you can learn in this latest episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's good to be back giving D&D advice. It took a few weeks off from this, but I feel like it's good to be back. I miss this set. I miss doing this, and I hope that you guys learned something from this video. Well, if you guys want to let me know that you learned something or that you enjoyed it in general, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Shadow over Karakonos, my actual play D&D podcast. It is linked in the cards, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment darkest hour to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.